Okay, so pleased to be joined by Tim Gore, who is the International Climate Change Policy Advisor for OXFAM. I'll make sure I get that right. Tim, many of our viewers will have watched the live broadcast of your side event, of OXFAM's side event here this morning on the Climate Fund. Perhaps for those who didn't catch it, you can give a quick overview of what this fund is.
Sure, so we're here today saying that one of the essential outcomes from Cancun is the establishment of what we call a fair climate fund. So we're not looking for just any kind of new institution to be built. We've got enough climate funds already out there. What we need is something different, a fair climate fund that puts the interests of poor people, and especially women, at its heart, and makes sure that we get the money that's desperately needed in poor countries to cope with climate change to those that need it most and can spend it best.
What are the prospects of achieving this? Is this something that we're kind of on course to achieve? As far as the negotiations are here concerned, how's climate finance and the climate fund doing?
Well, actually, the fund is one of the success stories, if you like, the more positive stories of the talks this year since Copenhagen. We've seen a growing convergence of parties on the need to establish a fund. But what we're saying is, just any kind of fund isn't enough. So we need a fair climate fund, and we're trying to stress some of the principles which we want to see reflected in the decision text on Friday night. And that includes making sure that developing countries have a strong voice on the decision-making structures of the new fund. It means addressing what we call the adaptation gap in the current management of climate finance. So what we see currently is that less than 10% of flows of climate finance are going to adaptation, more like 90% going to mitigation.
And why is that?
So I think that's because developed countries have a preference for giving money to low carbon technologies, things which might end up creating markets perhaps for their own industries. I think because they recognize that we have a shared interest in making sure that emissions are reduced, but not necessarily a shared interest in making sure that the most vulnerable people on the planet, those who are already being impacted by climate change, receive the life-saving support that they deserve. So one of the things that we're saying, we've got to address that adaptation gap in this design of this new fund, and the way you can do that is by writing into the text a guarantee that at least 50% of the funding this time in this new fund will go to adaptation.
Is that something that's kind of on the table at the moment to be discussed?
So it's not in the latest text from the LCA chair, but we do see that in some key submissions made by some of the most vulnerable countries. So Bangladesh, in their submission last week on the new fund, they included that, and in the LDC group's position, we see a call for more than 50%, in fact 60% of the funding to go to adaptation. So the ideas are there, they're floating around. What we need is progressive, ambitious ministers to pick them up, get behind them, back them, and make sure that they're in the text come Friday.
Why aren't in the text already? Are people actively opposing them? Because it seems like a pretty difficult thing to come out and say you don't support openly. Why aren't they there?
So in the Copenhagen Accord, we saw some language which called for balance between adaptation and mitigation. So it seemed indeed like countries are prepared to make some sort of rhetorical commitment towards making sure that adaptation and mitigation receive a balanced allocation in the finance contributions that they make, but they haven't lived up to that. And what we see is, well, in the EU, for example, they're fast up finance, and they're one of the better performers. 1/3 going to adaptation and 2/3 to mitigation. So we think that unless you can get it absolutely clear in the text, countries want to maintain that bit of flexibility. Developed countries want to be able to decide, pick and choose where the money goes, and that's just not acceptable with climate finance. We need to make sure that the decisions made on how climate finance is spent, where it goes, are made in legitimate fora by the right kind of people, and that means making sure that developing countries have a strong voice in deciding how that money gets spent, and it also means making sure that women have a strong voice in how it's spent, and that's one of the other areas that we're trying to address in the design of this new fund. We know that women are absolutely vital to building the solutions that we need to climate change. We also know that they're some of the worst affected by climate change, so we've got to make sure that their concerns of women are at the heart of this new fund. That means that they should have equal representation or close to it in the executive board of the new fund. So those people that are deciding how the money gets spent will include a strong say for women, and also that the whole priorities and policies of the new fund should be directed to address the concerns of women. Because at the end of the day, it's they that need the money most, but also they that know how to spend it best.
And what can people at home, what can our viewers at home do to support the development of a fair fund here?
So what we've launched today is a civil society call, so it's here, and there's 200 signatories, in fact more than 200 organisations from around the world, north, south, east, west, big international organisations like OXFAM, small grassroots organisations from here in the region, Latin America, right across Africa, Asia and so on. So we've got a strong civil society call gone out today. OXFAM's running a campaign called Sow the Seed. There's loads of stuff on the OXFAM website, oxfam.org, where people can go along, get involved in the campaign. And it's a clear message which we need to send this week to ministers. Don't leave Cancun without establishing a fair climate fund, and don't try and fob us off with any kind of fund. We want a fair fund, and that means you've got to put developing countries at its heart. Let's have some clear language guaranteeing that at least 50% of the resources will flow to adaptation, and let's make sure that women are at the heart of the new fund.
Okay, Tim, it's great to get your update on that, and perhaps we'll join you again at the end of the week to see what the result of these talks have been. And obviously we'd encourage our viewers to go and visit the Sow the Seed, did you say it was?
Sow the Seed at the OXFAM website, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Tim.
Thanks a lot.